All right. Just another minute or so as we get families coming on line. So are you guys all in? Well, no, Karen is my Central Time person. Everybody else, are you guys in Eastern Time? So this is lunchtime for you? No, Kelly, where are you at?
I'm in California. I'm on Pacific.
Oh, okay. Sounds like, so good morning. Oh, yeah, it took quite a while for Shelly and I to kind of transition to Pacific time last week when we were in San Diego. So yeah, it was funny. I feel as soon as I like landed in Dallas, I was like, oh, finally, I'm in my back to Central Time zone.
Yeah, that's how I feel when I travel to Boston for work. Yep.
I bet.
For a few days, yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It takes a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Well, it looks like we have several families on, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to the third annual TCSF CTR series. My name is Casey Craig, and many of you know me as Stella's mom, but for those of you that are new to our community, I am thrilled to have held the title of Executive Director for the Acute Syndrome Foundation since June of this year. The Clinical Trial Readiness series has been extremely popular the last 2 years, and I'm excited to continue the series this year. Today is the kickoff of a 3-part series, so make sure you keep your calendar open for the next 3 Wednesdays from 12 to 1 Eastern Standard Time. Before we get started on today's webinar with our industry partners and friends with Praxis, let's hit on a few housekeeping items. So let's start with the obvious. This is a new platform. Hop-in was great, but we're hopeful that holding Zoom webinars will alleviate some of the stress on our SCNAA families by not needing to register for each event or remembering yet another password. We do not need to add one more thing to our plates, right? So with that said, this is the first time using this feature on Zoom, so please bear with us through any technical issues we might encounter. Families, if you experience any technical issues on your end at home, please try refreshing your screen first. And then you can also reach out to Shelly Frappier on our CTR Facebook event page or the family support group page, and she will help you troubleshoot. All questions for our panelists today should be typed in the Q&A section. It should be located on the bottom of your screen. And then also at the very end of today's session, I will post a quick 4-question anonymous poll that will happen here in Zoom. It will pop up. And so if you can answer those, we'd really, really appreciate that. At the very end, I'll post that. Also, I'd like to take this moment to thank our 2 platinum level sponsors, Praxis and Neurocrine, for their continued support for our community. Now let's focus on the stars of the show. We have our friends from Praxis. Today, we have several familiar faces, as we've heard from Christian and Kelly before, but today we have 2 new faces that I'm super excited to introduce to you, Karen and Raji. I'll start with our first presenter, Karen. Karen is a mama to a medically complex child, and in many ways, her life looks just like ours. It warms my heart whenever she has her daughter next to us as we're chatting on Zoom, because I'm like, man, I'm right there. I'm living your life. I totally understand. So since joining Praxis, like I've said, I've had the pleasure of getting to know her, and I actually got to meet her and Christian last week in person at our Global Genes Summit in San Diego. Karen is sweet as pie, and she's an incredibly hard worker. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Karen and our friends with Praxis.
Thank you, Casey. I just want to reiterate what an honor it was to meet you at Global Genes, at the Global Genes event. Bear with my voice a little. I actually ended up contracting COVID at Global Genes, so I'm in recovery mode, but I'm so excited to be here. And like Casey mentioned, I'm also mom to a daughter. My daughter has CDKL5 deficiency disorder, which is a developmental epilepsy, very similar to SCN8A. And I walk those shoes and live that life, but we all just learn to cope with that, right? We move forward. But it's one of the reasons that I'm really honored to be part of this Praxis team, because I quickly realized how determined this company is to bring treatments quickly, and how very much the patient and their family are at the core of this effort. So with that being said, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen and we will get started. So I should have had a slide with some pictures of Samantha to share, but I did not get that made in time. You will
next time you can show us.
as we get to know each other better, we will definitely you will get to see her. I'm really excited to be a part of this presentation today and to be kicking this off. Like we mentioned, this life can be challenging, and we want to make sure that we communicate clearly and transparently with all of you. Today, our team, we have Christian Rubio, our Vice President and Patient Advocacy Lead, and then we have Dr. Raji Mahalingam, our expert epileptologist and clinical lead, and also Kelly Dalby, the Associate Director, Natural History and Diagnostic Lead for the epilepsies, but she is also a mom of a child with a developmental epilepsy. So today, what we're going to be sharing with you and talking about a little bit is the PRAX-562 study updates and Praxis's commitment to epilepsy, and that's going to be with Christian. And then the potential of PRAX-562 and early onset SCN8A DEEs and other DEEs, and Raji's going to present in that section. And then creating the impact, SCN8A families and Ciitizen, and how those efforts have really played a role, your efforts played a role in how PRAX-562 was moving forward and the development of those studies. And it's a really exciting agenda, and we're excited to be sharing it with you. I do want to set a little bit of expectations today. If you have questions, like Casey mentioned, please do type them in the Q&A. But we are not going to do a live Q&A section today. So those questions will be kept, and they will help inform and help us develop our future communications as we continue to strive to be transparent with what's going on. We recognize that it's challenging when you're in a time with a study where maybe things can't be talked about yet. So some of the types of things we can't talk about today are trial design and study design, inclusion, exclusion criteria, things such as that. But as soon as those things can be shared, we will be coming back to the community with an education effort there. And with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Christian for him to get us started.
One more.
Did I go too far?
That's okay. We can stay there. Thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm excited to be here with you. For some of you, you may know Praxis pretty well, as we've been working with the community for a few years now. But for many others, I want to make sure that we take some time to introduce ourselves as a company and as a team, and to introduce more about our dedication and what our why. Before I do that, though, let's start with what's most important right away for everybody, which is an update on kind of our path forward with PRAX-562, a sodium channel blocker for rare genetic epileptic encephalopathies or DEEs, like SCN8A. Now, pictured in this slide is a typical drug development path for potential new drug. Today, we'll provide insights into the kinds of promising data we've seen in our preclinical mouse studies and in phase 1, where healthy adults were exposed to the molecule, to promising results. We now are, if you need an indication of kind of exactly where we are now, we're now at the end of phase 1 and intending to start phase 2 in early onset SCN8A patients outside the United States this year, and in parallel, work to resolve the current clinical hold we are on with the FDA in the US. But I want to be clear that this is not a pivot away from the US, but rather a parallel path forward that we have kind of built into our planning all along to ensure we continue to be able to make progress on this study in the coming months. Next slide, please. Epilepsy is core to what we do here at Praxis. And it's been that way since the beginning, starting with Steve Petru, our Chief Scientific Officer's work, connecting the genetic insights from his work at the Florey Institute and translating that science into potentially disease-modifying therapies with co-founding members, like you see here, who are parents of kids with genetic epilepsies. Praxis have parents of children with genetic epilepsies within the core team and leaders, and as leaders in the organization, not just as our community advisors. And they're joined by experienced epileptologists, with a deep background caring for your kids through their diagnostic and care odysseys. And they are supported by a committed team of professionals who have their own very personal reasons for dedicating their careers to pursuing the alleviation of burdens of central nervous system disorders. And at Praxis, we pursue basically two kinds of therapies. We pursue the bringing forward of new treatments to help patients and families where there are no treatments today, and also where treatment options may exist, but they're just not good enough. They're not targeted treatments like the ones in development for SCN8A and other DEEs. So what does that mean? How are we defining the unmet needs that we see and that how we choose to focus around them? It starts with you, and it starts with understanding your journey, and that's best expressed with a thank you. And that is something you're going to hear more of today in this presentation. Next slide, please. Through conversations with you, we've learned so much about your kids' conditions and how they're needed and their needs and how you care for them. It's more than just seizure control that you need. You need solutions to help your children develop as they should and make important gains in self-care and communication. Being able to tell you what's wrong or what they need, or to go to the bathroom by themselves or feed themselves, this is what would make life so much better for them and for your families. Right now, there are no medicines out there that are made specifically for your children. Existing anti-epileptic medications were made for seizure symptoms, not for the kids' lives. The industry has truly failed them. And how do we know that? Well, because current treatments may provide some efficacy sometimes against seizures, but often come with intolerable side effects. And they don't address or they limit the progress in other needs that you have in neurological development and improved quality of life. Since these medicines were created, the science around epilepsy has truly evolved. We know so much more about the genetics underlying epilepsies, and we're working to harness that into precision medicines. We believe that precision medicine approaches will transform the care of rare genetic epilepsies. And we believe that a precision medicine approach offers new potential for treatments that are truly made for your child's epilepsy with enhanced efficacy and improved tolerability and the potential to address symptoms beyond seizures. Next slide, please. So wrapping up kind of our overview, it's good to zoom out a little bit and understand where we're coming from and what we're doing. We've built deep expertise in the genetics of epilepsy and applied that to build one of the largest portfolios of epilepsy programs in the world. Our portfolio applies precision approaches, blending small molecule therapies and antisense oligonucleotides, or ASOs, that target the underlying genetic cause of disease for epilepsies. And though we have a very strong focus on epilepsy solutions, our expertise in epilepsy is inspiring and informing innovation in other central nervous system disorders. We have a promising candidate for essential tremor, which is often cited as one of the many complexities involved in kids with DEEs as well. And you'll hear more about that in the coming months, and one for Parkinson's as well. There's one clearly most interest to you today, and the one that we're going to be talking about in depth, which is PRAX-562 for early-onset SCN8A and other DEEs. And Dr. Raji Mahalingam is going to take you through updates and a deeper explanation of it. Following her introduction and walkthrough of PRAX-562, Kelly Dalby, Associate Director of Natural History and Diagnostics Lead for Epilepsies, as well as one of our founding team members and a rare DEEs mom herself, is going to really take you in depth and take you kind of on a behind the scenes view of the kind of data that we were able to collect through the Ciitizen project with the Acute Syndrome Foundation that's helped shape the path forward for this program, meaning basically how your participation has helped shape our path forward. So with that, I'm going to give the floor back to Karen and Raji to introduce Dr. Mahalingam as well as PRAX-562.
Thanks, Christian. So Raji, I thought it would be nice to just take a moment and let you share just a little bit about yourself with the SCN8A community.
Sure, thanks, Karen. So I'm the medical lead at Praxis in clinical development. So my background is that I'm a pediatric epileptologist by training. I trained in pediatric neurology at Cornell and did my epilepsy training at CHOP, and I'm incredibly grateful to my mentors during my training. I've been in practice in both private and academic settings for almost 2 decades in New Jersey. For the last 2 decades, I have helped take care of numerous children with epilepsy of various causes. I've seen my patients grow over the years and seen the challenges that they and their caregivers have firsthand. Honestly, I was frustrated prescribing the same ineffective medications and adding more and more medications, which often added to the side effects, but did not actually always work. I began to participate as an investigator in various clinical trials, and I saw the hope and the success I was bringing to our families and the difference I was making above and beyond just prescribing medication. This prompted me to take a bigger and bolder step actually to join industry in order to bring the medications faster to our communities. So my inspiration really to take this step are my patients, and I'm so grateful.
So what are some of the challenges that you've seen in your years of practice?
So when you take care of children with epilepsy, especially the difficult to control seizures, over the years, you almost become part of their family, and I'm sure you can relate to that, Karen. First of all, often controlling the seizures is a big challenge. Oftentimes, there are 2, 3 different medications, epilepsy diet, VNS, and yet the seizures are still not controlled. Secondly, multiple medications often means multiple side effects: sleepiness, nausea, vomiting, difficulty walking, and so on and so forth. Sometimes the existing sodium channel blockers, such as Dilantin, have what we call a narrow therapeutic index, meaning if you give a little too much, they become sleepy, or if the level falls a bit, then seizures occur. Another challenge is establishing the diagnosis with tests such as gene testing. Until recently, we didn't have tests available. Insurances wouldn't cover for testing. Many providers were not even aware, and to date, there's still some providers who are not aware that genetic testing is a vital part to diagnostic testing. You will hear more from Kelly about this from our Ciitizen data obtained from families like this audience regarding the time taken to get the diagnosis. If we don't get the right diagnosis, how will we get the right treatment? Lastly, it's not just about seizures, it's about, and we've heard, and Kristen mentioned this again, so we've heard time and time again, it's not just about development, it's not just about seizures, it's about development, it's about accomplishing the small goals, holding up, keep indicating their needs, sleeping better, which make a big difference in quality of life.
That's for sure. I can definitely agree with that statement. It is not just about the seizures. And as your child ages, the priorities change. I know your patients were fortunate to have you helping manage their care. And so when you talk about that a little bit, how as an epileptologist are you involved with that management kind of beyond seizures as well?
Right, so I would say, in any child, especially children with special needs, it takes a village. As an epileptologist, my focus is seizures, but there's a whole team that supports the child. There's the physical therapists, occupational therapists, behaviors, nurses, teachers, subspecialists like GI, and most importantly, the caregivers. So we are a team. We say multidisciplinary team in the true sense of the word that we need for taking care of our children. From the seizure control standpoint, we talked about it. We do not have medications that are specifically made with the pathology of SCN8A in mind. As a clinician, we're always looking out for the best medication that our patients, that we can prescribe for our patients with the least amount of side effects. We also sometimes try other treatments like epilepsy diets or VNS, which help to some extent, but don't always mitigate the seizures completely. There's a huge unmet need for precision medicine in our children. So beyond seizures, the team helps to take care of other types of issues with our children. But if we can precisely target the problem in our children, then this would decrease the seizures, and this might even affect and help development overall in our patients. In fact, that was what was frustrating me as a clinician, and that's why I joined Praxis, because we have such a great pipeline. So I felt like I could make a bigger difference, not just to my patients, but epilepsy community at large. This is why I'm so excited to talk about 562, really.
Yeah, I think that's the perfect lead-in. So let's hope. Oh, the slides are stuck again. Okay, let's try this one more time. And it was working so well.
This is where our agility of a special needs mom comes in, right? Like,
Right? Okay, there we go. Take it away, Raji.
Thank you, Karen. So I'm excited today to talk about PRAX-562, which is a novel sodium channel blocker with potential to precisely help patients with sodium channel dysfunction in conditions such as SCN8A, DEE. Next slide, please. I would like to talk about how 562 works first, but before that, we need to take a step back and understand as to why seizures occur in early onset SCN8A patients. So this will help us understand the way 562 works. This is somewhat of a sciencey slide, but it helps us understand what a sodium channel does and what's wrong with them in SCN8A patients. This is an illustration of a sodium channel in a nerve cell or a neuron. Nerve cells communicate or talk to each other by conducting electricity through sodium channels. This is how learning, movement, development occurs in children. The channel is supposed to open when needed and close when not needed. When sodium channels open, peak current is generated, which is represented in this illustration as the light yellow lightning bolt. Before the sodium channel closes, there is a step called inactivation, which prevents too much electricity or sodium ions to be conducted. If this activation does not occur properly, then extra electricity may continue to be conducted. That is what is called persistent current. Persistent current is represented by the darkened colored thin lightning bolt that we see here. So basically, too much sodium current can lead to abnormal neural activity, such as what occurs in epilepsy. Seizures in general occur due to hyperactivity or too much peak current and persistent current in sodium channels. Can we go to the next slide, please? In disease states such as early onset SCN8A, there is often issue with persistent current or sometimes hyperactive peak current or both. Current sodium channel blockers such as phenytoin or carbamazepine do not specifically target persistent current over peak current. They indiscriminately reduce the peak current. So in order for them to be effective on persistent current, we often have to increase the doses and peak current is blocked as a bystander. Moreover, they target not just the hyperactive sodium channels, which are the problem, but they also affect normally active sodium channels, which may reduce the ability of the neuron to carry out normal activities. So this could lead to unwanted side effects. What PRAX-562 does, it preferentially targets peak current and affects 562 preferentially targets persistent current and affects peak current only when the channel is hyperactive. Given its potency and preference to persistent current, 562 may have improved benefit with fewer side effects. Next slide, please. In vitro studies, PRAX-562 was demonstrated to be more potent than the typical sodium channel blockers and includes targeting NAV 1.6 channels, which is one of the main issues in SCN8A patients. PRAX-562 has a 60-fold preference for persistent current over peak current. Compared to other existing sodium channel blockers, 562 has at least twice the preferential targeting for persistent current. In mice models with SCN8A mutation, there was complete prevention of seizures with increasing doses of PRAX-562, as you see in this bar diagram. None of the mice treated with 10 mg per kg experienced seizures post-treatment. What is more interesting is that none of them demonstrated any side effects or tolerability issues. So what's our data in humans? We are further encouraged with our phase 1 data in healthy adult volunteers. To date, we have completed 3 studies spanning over 138 healthy adult volunteers. 562 was in general safe and tolerated well. Most observed side effects were mild to moderate in nature. In conclusion, PRAX-562, as I mentioned earlier, is a novel new generation sodium channel blocker with potential for enhanced efficacy and improved tolerability with fewer side effects. In preclinical studies, PRAX-562 demonstrated superior selectivity for disease state sodium channel hyperexcitability and persistent current when compared with standard sodium channel blockers. Seizures were nearly completely prevented in multiple seizure models, including mice models with SCN2A and 8A mutation. In multiple phase 1 trials with more than 100 adult healthy volunteers, PRAX-562 has been tolerated generally well. With the backing of the science, we intend to start phase 2 to assess the safety and tolerability of 562 in SCN2A and 8AD patients with liquid formulation that can be given orally or through the feeding tube. We're extremely excited about this study and hope to start enrolling patients this year outside of US. We're extremely grateful to have learned from you regarding the needs of the community. You have helped us shape the clinical design of 562 and advance this path forward. At this point, I would like to hand it over to Kelly, who will discuss how your involvement in Ciitizen has helped us better understand the challenges and needs of this community. Thank you.
Thanks, Raji. And like Karen mentioned and Christian mentioned, I work at Praxis. I've been there for almost 4 years, but most importantly, I have a son, Connor. He's 13 years old, and he has an SCN2A mutation. So I really understand the patient experience on a daily basis, living with these DEE kids. And I really understand how urgently we need better drugs for these kids. And so I carry that passion and that drive and that determination into my work every single day. And so happy to be at Praxis working at a company with making medicines for 8A patients, for 2A patients, and for a lot of other genetic epilepsies. And I think last time I was here, I shared some very early analysis on our 8A data. I shared a patient journey, but I wanted to quickly recap what Ciitizen is, just in case there's anyone new joining that isn't familiar yet with this initiative. And so Ciitizen is a company that goes out on the caregiver's behalf after consent and collects every single medical record from every single institution a patient was seen at. They extract the data, they de-identified the data, and then it's essentially a retrospective natural history study. And a couple things I want to point out. So it's open access data, meaning Praxis sponsored this 8A cohort, but it's not just Praxis's data. So any researcher with an IRB approved study or protocol can apply to Ciitizen and also access this data. In addition to any other biotech company, any other pharmaceutical company, they can also license this exact same data. And then there's also a lot of benefit to the caregiver. So the caregiver also gets a portal where they have access and own every single page of medical record from birth until present day. And one thing I learned when working on the Ciitizen initiative that's really, really important, and so I like to share it as often as possible, institutions only have to keep medical records for 7 to 10 years, and that includes raw EEGs. And so huge benefit to the caregiver, where all of my son's medical records, early EEGs, are in this portal. I can use that information to share with any other doctor, a second opinion, a third opinion, any researcher, any other basically research study or natural history study in the space. And if I did not do that, if I didn't set up this work through this portal or collect my son's early medical records, EEGs, those files would be gone. So super important and even though we're not sponsoring another cohort of 8A patients, if you aren't a part of Ciitizen, they also offer this service for free. So any parent is able to go straight through the Ciitizen website and set up a portal, and they'll go out and collect your medical records so that you have access, you have this portal, so you can utilize this, and so you aren't going to lose any of the early records. So super important.
Thank you for mentioning that, Kelly. I think that was really important for our families to know that we can still sign up for that through Ciitizen. We also had a family, I think we mentioned this to you, but sometimes it's nice to kind of know a little bit about what we've used with this. And we had a family that their child was transitioning from pediatric to adult care, and they needed lab work results that they had done in the pediatric side. And then they're all waiting in the hospital trying to find this, and the the family was like, wait a minute, I have it right here. And right there live, they were able to look at that data. The doctors could look at it and then immediately take that forward and expedite that care. So, I mean, it's just a great example of how you don't realize maybe how important it is to have this until you really need it. So,
yeah, no, I'm so glad you shared that, Casey. I've heard similar stories that parents have shared with me, and I have my own personal stories of how I've accessed this portal for my son's needs. So incredibly valuable, and so glad we have access to that. Karen, do you want to go to the next slide? And so I wanted to share a few of the ways where we have directly utilized this Ciitizen data for our 562 program. So the patient burden data and statistics that we analyzed from the Ciitizen cohort were put directly into our IND that we submitted with the FDA for 562. And that is the patient data that we used in our IND straight from the Ciitizen cohort. And you know what, I wanted to point out earlier, I love telling this story. So we've taken out several different cohorts in Ciitizen of genetic epilepsies, but I want to celebrate the 8A community. They were our second cohort in Ciitizen, and we left a 3-month window to try to recruit 50 patients. And what ended up happening is we, because of this tight-knit community that's so fantastic, we had a cohort of 79 patients recruited in a couple days. And so it saved us even more time at Praxis, where we didn't have to keep that 3-month window for recruitment. Ciitizen got really busy in collecting all these medical records, extracting the data, and we were able to take in the data a little bit earlier than expected. So kudos to this community, super fantastic. Yeah. So we use this data for our IND for 562. We also used a lot of this data to really inform our protocol development for IE criteria. So things like, how often are these patients having seizures? What should be basically the seizure number on average that patients are having? And then what ages do seizures start? Do seizures remit in this patient population? We were able to answer a lot of those questions and then inform our protocol writing from what we've learned. And then also we just had an abstract accepted into AES for our work on the 8A cohort. And so we'll be presenting at AES, we'll have a poster, and we really wanted to share a few of those insights that we're going to be sharing at AES with the community today. And then we're also plan to publish a disease impact paper on 8A from our learnings from the 8A Ciitizen cohort, and we hope to publish that next quarter of 2023. Karen, you can go to the next slide. And so just a little bit about demographics. So as I mentioned, we had 79 8A participants, and we had a very nice even spread of female to male ratio. On average, 8 years of age was the average age of the patient, and our youngest patient was just under 1, and our oldest patient was about 23 years old. And then from a lot of the work we did in analyzing the data, we separated this cohort into patients that did not have any seizures but may have had autism or intellectual disability, and we had 4 of those patients in this cohort. And then patients that had seizure onset at less than 6 months, we had 48 patients. And the average age of seizure onset in that subset of patients was about 2 months old. And we feel very confident at Praxis from the work that we've done that those patients are our gain of function patients. So not to say that you can't have a gain of function mutation and have a later age of seizure onset, but we feel that seizure onset in the first 6 months of life are not going to include loss of function mutations. And so our patient population in 8A, where they had seizure onset at greater than 6 months of age, we had 27 of those patients. And then 2 years of age was about the average age of seizure onset in that other cohort. And this slide right here shows the 75 of the 79 patients that had a seizure in the 8A cohort. And then all of the gray dots are basically a visit at the neurologist's office where there is a report of at least a seizure, and in the extracted data, the exact seizure frequency is given verbally by the caregiver to the neurologist. And then the sort of yellowish dots are seizures that are infantile spasms with hypsarrhythmia on the EEG. And then the darker green is status epilepticus. And as you can see in this patient population, more than half of these patients have had at least one bout with status epilepticus, which is really a life-threatening emergency. It really paints how severe this disease is and how we really need better medications. As you can see, some of these patient lines have several different green dots, which means they've had bouts of status their entire lives till end of record. So incredibly severe and incredibly serious. And then the basically the little black line at the end just is the end of records. So when we took in the data, that was the patient's current age. And then in the beginning of the slide, the dotted line is shows 6 months. So at the beginning, all of the patients that had seizures prior to 6 months of age and then after. And then you can go to the next slide, Karen. And as we're all familiar, so seizures are only one symptom among many with 8A mutations, and just really showing some of the other comorbidities that are just as severe as seizures in some of these patients and potentially more severe. I know for my son, he still has daily seizures, but it's not his most significant symptom, right? He has a movement disorder, choreoathetosis. It's the most problematic for us. So while these are in the classification of genetic epilepsies, there's so many other symptoms that really need better medications to be treated. And what we've noticed in the 8A cohort, so GI very affected, feeding difficulties, vomiting, constipation, GERD, and then hypotonia. The majority of patients also have this. And then sleep disorders. We've seen in the data, a lot of these patients cycling through different sleep meds. So clearly these meds are not working enough. And then of course, developmental delay. And this can range from the inability to even hold up your own head to slight developmental delay in this patient population and sort of everything in between. There's definitely a spectrum of severity with developmental delay or impairment in this population. Karen, you can go to the next slide. And then this is total lifetime medications, not just for seizures, but also for the other comorbidities we were just talking about. And then we broke it into seizure meds that are sodium channel blocking, other AEDs, and then medications for other comorbidities in addition to seizures. And as you can see, a lot of these patients are on a lot of different medications. So on average, trialing 18 different medications throughout lifetime. And remember that there's a spectrum of ages here, right? So the average age is 8 years, but a lot of these patients are only 1 or 2 years old. The oldest is 21. So all of this built into the average. Patients are cycling through many different medications, trying to get seizure control or relief from other comorbidities. And these medications are just not good enough. They're not helping these patients enough. And so, you know, from 3 medications all the way to trialing 44 different medications, as many as 19 anti-epileptic medications tried in some patients, and 26 different medications to treat other comorbidities that we talked about on the previous slide. And some of these patients cycling through and trying 7 different sodium channel blocking AEDs. So just paints the picture, the need, the urgency, and hopefully 562 is a much better medication for this patient population. Next slide. And then these are just some of the statistics we use, not only in the IND, but also in our abstract for AES. So broken down to first year of life in the blue, and then the black total lifetime. And so 9.6 medications prescribed and tried in the first year of life, incredibly significant. And then total lifetime is 20. And then procedures. So in this patient population, we've learned from this data, it's EEGs, it's CT scans, it's MRIs, it's feeding tubes surgically implanted. So on average, about 12 to 13 procedures in the first year of life, many of these done in hospital, and then 32 total lifetime. Many of these patients get dozens of EEGs depending on seizure frequency. And then hospitalization, so on average 4.3 in the first year of life, but then the next 2 bars over, duration 30 days in hospital in the first year of life. So total 1 whole entire month spent in hospital in the first year of life. And then on average 11 to 12 hospitalizations in total lifetime with a duration of about 78, 79 days. And then Karen, you can go to the next slide. And then I really like so much of this data that we're able to analyze in this, and I think this slide is so telling. And so really this is time from seizure onset, which is the first line on the left, to 8A genetic diagnosis. And 8A, just like 2A, was put on most standard epilepsy genetic panels in about 2014, 2015, when genetic epilepsy panels were even administered. Oftentimes it was just single gene tests prior to that, like SCN1A, Dravet, where a lot more was known. But jump to today, 2022, we have over 300 genes now known to cause pediatric epilepsy on epilepsy panels. And so, as you can see, a lot of the older patients, my son falls into this category, we went undiagnosed until he was 5 years old. A lot of these patients are going a lot longer than that, compared to today, where you're literally having seizure onset and then having an 8A diagnosis a month to 2 months, sometimes 3 months after that. So we're doing a fantastic job with getting a diagnosis much earlier on, but still need better treatments upon diagnosis. And two things to point out on this slide also: what about all of these older kids that did not go back and repeat a genetic epilepsy panel once 8A was added, or no one advocated for whole exome sequencing for them? They're still out there. They're undiagnosed, which becomes really important when companies like Praxis are making targeted medications for SCN8A. So we have more work to do in finding and diagnosing these older patients. And then something else that Praxis is really interested in, this slide shows time from seizure onset to genetic diagnosis. But we learned in the early onset 8A population, the average seizure onset is about 2 months old. And then the later onset seizure is about 2 years old. So are there other symptoms that emerge prior to seizures that we can really study, come up with, and have an idea before the onset of seizures? This patient looks like they have an 8A mutation, get them tested much earlier, even prior to the onset of seizures, and then a medication that's more selective or targeted to 8A. And so we're working on that right now at Praxis, and definitely want to share as our research goes further with the community what we found. And so really, this is a first pass analysis at some of the highlights in the 8A data, but so excited by this data set. There's so much more work to do on it and share with the community, and also more to learn from the community, right? This is one data set. I think it's one of the most quality data sets we've seen in AA that I've seen, and the speed with which we're able to collect this data and start looking into it has been fantastic. But definitely need more interactions with the AA community, because there's also things that the caregiver knows that aren't going to be reflected necessarily in these data sets. So, taking both approaches is needed. And, a thank you again for how, I guess, just really fantastic involved the 8A community is, that when we had an ask, the community showed up and supported this initiative. So I think I'm going to hand it back over to Christian for some more thoughts.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you so much for walking through that data. And to reiterate, we're all super thankful, and actually really want to congratulate both TCSF and the community, the parents, and all the contributors to the Ciitizen data set for being so responsive and so engaged as an overall community. It's really a win for everyone when you have high participation rates in the kind of data generation that can propel a study forward. So we really celebrate with you in that regard. A couple of kind of circling back points now. Next slide, please. Just want to remind people about where we are with PRAX-562 now that you've learned a lot more about it. We have wrapped up our phase 1 study of PRAX-562 in healthy adults, and are preparing to launch and intend to launch our phase 2 study with a small cohort of SCN8A patients outside the US in this year in 2022, along with resolving our clinical hold that we have with the US FDA to be able to move in parallel both inside the US and outside. We do feel very confident in that, given that we had a similar hold prior to the launch of our PRAX-562 ASO study for SCN2A. That was also resolved, and we are now moving forward to get to our first kids dosed in that trial as well. So we're really excited about this, and in combination, it boosts our confidence. It should boost our community's confidence of our forward progress. And we want to make sure with that we stay in touch. The communications, as some may know, if you've been tracking others' trials, communications tend to come very suddenly when issues get resolved or announcements are made about trial sites and the next steps for pre-screening and pre-qualification for trials. So in order to stay in touch, next slide, please. There we have the option here where if you hold your camera up close to the screen, you can actually use the QR code here to go sign up for communications directly for the upcoming opportunities and for us to learn more about you as well. And of course, we'll be continuing to work with TCSF and SCN8A groups from around the world as we prepare for international rollout as well. So we just want to make sure we stay in touch, and that you can, if you have any questions, whether you posted them here today or if you're viewing the video on demand after the fact, please, you can reach out to us directly as well. We will be going through the questions with the leadership from the group and discussing kind of what we need to do going forward as well to make sure our communications are transparent and clear and timely, and continue to collaborate with you, the community. So next slide, please. Some final points about that is, if you have any questions, if you have any needs in particular that you want to raise with us, you can contact Praxis at patientadvocacy@praxismedicines.com. And of course, at the end of this, please take our survey, which will be on your screen, so that before you go, so that we can learn more, we can do better continuously with you. And from there, I'll hand it back to Casey to wrap us up here.
Thank you so much. This was really, really informative. And, I've been making notes as we go through, and honestly, some of the things that I was taking away from all of you is that as a parent, I feel very seen right now. I heard all of these things, from the Ciitizen data, the amount of stuff that you guys were able to pull out of that. But the things that you really honed in on was very important to me as a parent, because I'm like, wow, they understand this is not all about seizures. We've mentioned that several times, that the comorbidities of our kiddos can sometimes be more problematic than the actual seizures. And that you guys are looking at our children as a whole, and how committed you guys are to our community. I mean, I know this because, Karen and I are chatting usually at least once a week, or not more, but sometimes, we don't give those updates. I'm not posting on our Facebook, hey, Karen and I chatted today, but I want to really make sure that everyone knows how committed this team is to our community and to this molecule. They want this to succeed as much as we do. And just hearing that you guys are looking at the quality of life, and that you're looking at all of these different elements. And Raji, hearing your experience as a pediatric epileptologist, I mean, you essentially could have been our epileptologist, and us chatting. And, there were many times that our epileptologist is hugging me as I'm crying because we're running out of options and we don't know what to do. And so knowing that background is super important to me as a parent, that you've seen our community, or such that a similar community to ours, and that your passion is here to work on this. And so, yep, I'm super excited for PRAX-562, and like they said, we want to be involved. We want to be able to give feedback back and forth, and so we really appreciate this opportunity and taking these Q&A. We'll look forward and see what we can do for the future to make sure we stay up to date and we get you guys the information you need. Because like you said, if you say jump and we say how high, our community is awesome at that. And so we very much appreciate it. And I hope everyone gives you a round of applause for yourself and a pat on the back for, us always jumping to the occasion. And yeah, we like to talk about that Ciitizen and how quickly we were able to jump on that. So, and how useful it's been for not just you guys, but for us as a parent, having that data and being able to use it. So, yes.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and put up the poll real quick, if that's okay. I'm afraid I'm going to forget. So let me go ahead and do that before we get too far. So I will launch that. There are only 4 questions and they are anonymous. So you guys can go ahead and do that. I'm hoping that it's on your screen as it is on mine. Let's see. Looks like everyone's kind of working on it now. And we'll go from there. And then just remember, if you guys were late getting here, we have this recorded and we will post it on our Facebook page and on our website as quickly as we can. Do you guys have anything else before we wrap up?
I think I'll just remind us that, the team, we're going to have team members at AES and we'll be excited to join the gathering. Really, I think as much to just meet and listen, not just to present we hopefully will have news for sure, but also we're there to just kind of be with you. And get to know the
super
community.
excited about that. And it's in person. So we will have, what we're planning on doing is having in person. So families will bring their kiddos. And this is my favorite time of year, absolute favorite time of year. Because as you guys are presenting, our kids are talking in the background and rolling around on the floor, and we get to have that real life experience. But we're also going to have it live streamed as well. And so we're hoping to have it in conjunction to something similar to this as a webinar, to where we can kind of toggle back and forth, so we can get those of us at home that can't travel or it's too far away. But we are excited to have you guys at the gathering and be able to meet some of our kiddos. So absolutely.
Great.
We're ready for it.
Looking forward to it.
Yes. All right. I think we have everyone on the poll that I think we're pretty much there. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And we will wrap up. Thank you guys so much for not only showing up today, but for being a platinum sponsor for this event. And so we can gather together as families and learn more about the program.
It's an honor to do so.
All
Thank
right.
you for having us, Casey.
Yes, thank you. And for SNAA families, remember next week, we will be back on Wednesday from 12 to 1 Eastern Standard Time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.